the future of, I'm not sure what, the future of enhanced advertising, right. And we as a panel group before this presentation decided we don't know what that means, so we're going to turn this over to the audience and hopefully you can tell us. But we'll get to that in a moment. What I'd like to do before I introduce the panelists, introduce myself. My name is Michael Casson. And what I'd like to do is just give a couple of thoughts about what I believe, taking a line from a recent successful documentary, what I believe is the inconvenient truth about advertising. It's an open season on television's industry's business model. Over the next decade, the idea of video content being limited to a single time and device will become quaint. I think we can say it's probably over the next week. No wonder the pundits are crying like Cassandra. One of the best, Hollywood Reporter's Diane Myrmagast claimed recently, television needs a quick interactive makeover, which she says may not even be possible. The inconvenient truth about advertising is that they're all right. The future of media and entertainment is increasingly uncertain. In my opinion, the methods by which content is created, distributed, monetized, and consumed are changing before our eyes. A set of powerful and disruptive forces that will last for years and years are in front of us. Consumers, as you know, are increasingly calling the shots in the converged media environment. They come together in online communities, generate their own content, mix it, share it on a growing number of social networks. No longer a captive mass audience, today's media consumer is unique, demanding, and engaged. The potential impact of convergence on television and advertising industries has long been predicted. But I think it's fair to say 2006 stands out as the year when the theory met the reality. Last year, incumbent media providers veered off the path upon which they had built their businesses and struck some what appeared to be watershed deals with computer makers, web portals, cable operators, and search engines. And if we just look at the network upfronts of 2005 and 2006 as indicative of the marketplace phenomena that we're facing, I think it's fair to say that the networks did a brilliant job of addressing the market in 2005, and coming into 2006, again, from my perspective, it chose the wrong year to pick a fight with advertisers in terms of how things are determined and what metrics should be used. And although the activity has been unprecedented, no clear-cut strategy has emerged for organizations navigating the nascent converged media environment. Convergence presents a huge risk for businesses that are predicated on controlling media consumption. Yet convergence also affords the opportunity for great rewards as companies reassemble content, services, and communications into higher value experiences for consumption at any time and on any device. So whether you view it as a threat or an opportunity, there's no question that convergence is unbundling video content from the television and broadcast or cable networks. This commingling of professional and, a word I'm certain we'll hear a few more times this afternoon, user-generated content, is the new way to take advantage of interactive on-demand audiences who have clearly an intrinsic pent-up demand to communicate. Convergence, I think, then doesn't mean the end of content bundling. Instead, it shifts the power to do so towards the consumer. And video consumption, which I think is at an all-time high, has clearly been defined by a limited number of linear channels and scheduled programmings, obviously something of the past. I think if you look at the network television season this year, I, for one, have experienced more water cooler chat about programming than I think I've ever experienced before, or certainly in a long time. And yet if you read the trades, the shows aren't being watched, or if they're being watched, they're not exactly sure what's happening. And the limit, as we saw with CBS canceling that show Smith 3 episodes in, the tolerance level is way below that of previous years. So as a backdrop to what we're going to talk about today, I just wanted to sort of set the stage. And with that, I'd like to introduce the panel. We're very fortunate to have a great group of people today, many of whom have had to sit through one of these with me before, so I apologize in advance for a second or third dose. Immediately to my right, we have Joey Carson. Joey's the CEO of Bune & Murray Productions, one of the leading independent production companies in North America and really globally. A tremendous amount of success with shows like Simple Life and God knows, lots of interesting things. And Joey is one of those people in the business who understands where the marketplace is going. And so it's great to have Joey. Tom Meyer. Tom is the president of Davy Brown Productions. Fair to say, by most accounts, the leading company focused on the business which we used to refer to as product placement, but something that Tom has been part of, really migrating into an entire new space, much more in the area of branded programming and content integration, and still at the base of it some amount of product placement, but clearly not what Davy Brown likes to stand for, and nor should they any longer. Carlos Sinatra, one of the original founders of Plum, a very niche-oriented channel, which is an interesting thing for us to focus on because of targeted programming and targeted messaging, which I think is something we're going to talk about. And Carla spent the earlier part of her career at NBC and Showtime and Viacom and some large networks. So her perspective is going to be very valuable in where we're going to go today. And we have Nick Donino, who's joining us from National Lampoon, and Nick runs all the National Lampoon networks, including Toga TV and the comedy channels. And I think I just read somewhere that the National Lampoon networks were rating as amongst the highest comedy channels in the world. So it'll be great to have a perspective from Nick's point of view, both from a programming standpoint and from a brand, because National Lampoon is an extraordinary brand with a lot of history and a lot of sort of past, present, and future. Eric Persson. Eric joins us from the Cimarron Group, one of the leading entertainment marketing companies. Cimarron Group's been in business for more than a quarter of a century and represents some of the major film studios in their marketing campaigns, and something that Eric's focused on the interactive side of the business, but motion picture marketing is at the forefront of where brands are meeting content in an interesting fashion, so it'll be great to get some perspective. And finally, Suzanne Kolb from eChannel. Suzanne runs marketing and also has a fair amount to say about programming alongside Ted Harbert and the other folks at the eChannel. But Suzanne spent a long time at WB and is really one of the stars in the industry, and somebody with whom I've had personal experience in some of the areas we're going to talk about. So we can talk with some specifics. So I welcome all of you, and I'd like to open up with a little bit of a approach. When we were sitting and having lunch before the panel, we couldn't decide if we were going to refer to the marketplace as a clusterfuck or a circle jerk. So I'd like a show of hands. The panel was split, so I just want to see where everybody came out. I mean, we're talking about the marketplace, not the audience, not by any means. But I think the theme that we're going to talk about in the context of enhanced advertising is a bit of the chaos in the marketplace. And I think that we would all agree that there is that moment of chaos where marketers, programmers, portals, distributors of content, creators of content are all searching, and they're searching in a very rapid fashion to find the answers. So what I'd like to do is sort of jump right into the middle of one of the issues that seems to be on the tip of everybody's tongue, which is the impact of user-generated content. And I want to bracket it for a moment. I want to bracket it in the term, and I promised I'd only say this about 72 times today because I heard the expression for the first time yesterday. That expression was curated user-generated content. Now, filtered user-generated content people have talked about, but I had not heard the expression curated. What curated meant to me was one thing. I'd like to turn to Eric and ask Eric what his definition of curated or filtered user-generated content is, and it'll lead us into the next question.
I think user-generated content is kind of interesting because it sort of is the result of people wanting to be part of this thing, and really they're making this content for their friends. It's a byproduct. It's a plus that anybody else is going to see it. But that's why MySpace is so successful. YouTube, these sort of things. We're working on something right now for a client that I would call this sort of curated user-generated content. They're going to create a site, and they're going to provide assets for people who might be a fan of this particular franchise to download, add to their own computer, and then they can use these assets then to create their own content. Then they're going to be able to upload this new trailer or this new whatever they create, which is utilizing pieces from this franchise, and post it to a site, and then they can send their friends there, and they can vote on it, and the top 5 may win some trip to premiere or something like that. But I think that the premiere aspect's not even that important. What you have to realize is all they want is their friends to see it, which extends into the brands that they're buying as well. I don't remember the name of this site, but I was just reading the other day about a site where essentially all it is videos of people who got screwed by a product, and they're creating videos.
How long you got?
Yeah, and they're creating videos of how bad that product. So their own little mini commercials telling people not to buy it, and they send their friends to this, and they're just trying to. I was discussing this with somebody the other day. People are trying to tell you what they want, and that's what this content is. They want it to be funny. They want this kind of product. They want to buy this thing, and what my thing is, I don't think marketers are listening. They're telling you what they want, but you're not listening to them. We're still trying to push what we want them to buy down their throat. When you have this interactive tool to find out exactly what they want, but we're not using it for that. We're still just trying to fit a TV commercial into a banner ad or a website or something like that, when all we have to do is say, what do you want? Oh, that's what you want? Great, we'll make that. If we make it, will you buy it? And half the time, more than that, they might say yes. So it's a shift in perspective is what I've been seeing. But in terms of curated user-generated content, I think if you provide them the tools, they will make the content, and they will upload it to YouTube and things like that. There's only a certain level of control they'll accept over that. They'll want Final Cut, and they'll want Final Edit, and if they see, and I've seen this on message boards, and it certainly would be extrapolated out to video, if you edit their comments too much, they'll stop posting to that board, because then it loses its legitimacy to them as an authentic, genuine place for them to express themselves.
But Eric, that's exactly where I wanted you to go, and I'd like to switch over to Joey for a second, because one of the things about user-generated content that's seemingly been interesting to the consumer or to the user is the ability to do away with the so-called gatekeeper. And no disrespect, but Jeff Zucker or Leslie Moonves or Ted Harbert or a gatekeeper who can make a decision in terms of programming. Joey, you deal with that every day when you present something. The democratization that was promised by user-generated content, how do you see that playing in terms of yourself as a content creator who's got to take a program to a network and get it on the air?
I'm not really concerned about it. I think user-generated content, this is just my own perspective, is 98.5% bad, and nobody cares. I think, like you said, Eric, it's to me, the demographic is they just want to communicate with one another. I mean, just for those of you that have kids, just watch your babysitter next week and see how she uses her phone, or your own teenage children. It's all about communication. I mean, they can be sitting right next to each other and texting each other back and forth. So
that moves towards the circle jerk.
That's true. I solved that problem at the lunch, by the way.
That's right. You did.
But so to me, I think in a lot of ways it's really good. It's nice that people have a way to express themselves, etc. But what I've found is, and the networks I think I think they were initially behind in identifying the way the space was moving. I think they caught up very quickly. But at the same time, they still, again, I'm not in a network. I used to be, but I'm not now. To me, I don't think it's a money-making part of their business. It's more of maybe a marketing part of the business per se, but that's not to say it wouldn't be. But at the end of the day, what I've seen from the networks is almost an increased level of they don't have the willingness that they used to take the risks on programming. So for instance, a company like ours, where maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, we would just go straight into a 1-hour reality show pickup. We'd come in and we'd pitch an idea, and they'd say, fine, done, let's do 6 hours or 10 half hours, whatever it was. That has now come to, they're following a model where they're putting shows to pilot, and they're focus grouping them. So I think they've almost taken on, they're more risk averse than they were as related to programming just even a couple of years ago. which I've found really interesting. And so I think if they're looking to people like us who have a proven track record of delivering good shows with, that are with good ratings and making the studios money, if they're coming to us and saying, well, now wait a minute, we want to focus group this and test this and do that, and we're only going to do this. To me, I don't think for them, in terms of content creation, I don't think they really care or are worried about user-generated content. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Let me, Eric, 1 second. Let me flip this over to Suzanne, because Suzanne, you're in a role for the eNetworks, which I think covers both E and InStyle and style. You see a fair amount of this coming your way, because the decisions that are going to be made at a network or the networks that you oversee are going to involve both the marketing side as well as the programming side as well as the ad sales side. From your perspective, how do you?
Well, I think there's bits of what's been said so far that I completely agree with. That when it comes from the user-generated, there are kind of two ways that I think we've looked at it. One is from a straight marketing point of view, to what Joey was saying, that there's an enormous amount of opportunity there to listen, as Eric said, to what the audience is saying and deliver them content and messaging in a way that takes advantage of that trend. Basically, user-generated, I think, is just another way to be social and another way to be validated. So in many ways, if we work within that framework, whether primarily it's been more from a marketing point of view, giving them assets to our show, letting them see our shows in different ways, editing particular creative that's designed to speak to that world, doesn't feel like it's coming from an established entity in the same way. If we give them other ways to engage with shows that they already care about, like Simple Life, that's a perfect example, then it's all a way to make them a more invested fan, a more invested part of our brand, and feel like we care about what they have to say. I think in that validation, at some point, we do believe there will be a monetization aspect of this that will catch up to that. But if we don't, if we're not there, if we are not the brand that they are continuing to care about, then when that monetization catches up, we won't matter. So that's been our sort of motive, is to go out and try everything. You know, we were among the first to go with YouTube. We were among the first to put our shows online, just to try to figure, all right, we will try this. They're experimenting. We need to experiment as well. And as we're experimenting, let the business model catch up.
Well, let me, you mentioned brands. Tom, you're in a situation where you have responsibility for some of the world's greatest brands. I mean, you work with Pepsi, you work with AT&T, and brands at that ilk, Fortune 100, probably Fortune 50 brands. It makes up the majority of your client base. These are brands, and the ability to have, for example, what Burger King did on Heavy, where they allowed the user to, or Chevrolet did with having the users generate their own commercial messaging. Again, you're a steward of these brands and you're responsible for them as they play in the content world. How have you managed through this, and do you see a role for product integration in the user-generated space? And I don't want to spend the whole panel on user-generated, but I'm...
Well, I think the user-generated space is incredibly interesting, and I can't wait to maybe be here in 3 to 5 years and see what we all say. Is it a fad? Does it have a role in marketing? You mentioned the Chevrolet, the GM example, which sort of blew up in their face.
But Burger King went the other way. I mean, it was positive.
Went the other way. Yeah, I think user-generated content has a time and a place in a certain category that maybe it works better with. I can't see Clorox, putting out a campaign that tries to involve consumers to create consumer-generated content, but perhaps you could for a car much more easily, provided you don't go down that environmental path. I heard Suzanne mention the monetization model. When does that catch up? I think we have to think about the business side of what's going on here. The user-generated content on YouTube is purely entertainment, and at this point hasn't truly been monetized. And it's a big deal if you got to figure out how to pay for a $1.6 billion acquisition. And how is that going to happen? Is it going to happen purely through advertising? That's a lot of eyeballs that you've got to capture over a period of time to make that money back. My feeling about it is that user-generated content is a great way to create community. And brands can live in and around that community, and they may or may not take an active part of putting their brand inside that user-generated content. Some categories, brands that have utility and can be utilized, fit better in user-generated content than perhaps my previous example of Clorox. So I think that that from the brand perspective, that's where we're going to end up living with a user-generated content world. If it happens to be Mountain Dew, they may help or enable their consumers to live in a user-generated world around action sports. But the brand itself, the actual product placement, may be in there, it may not. It's probably not as important as just having the user know that Mountain Dew is helping enable the creation of this content and live within this community who loves action sports. So it's going to be an interesting world for the next couple of years.
Well, let's jump off of that and turn to Carla with my target question. So, the demographic of Plum, with your reach being in the Hamptons and Aspen, in Cape Cod, and help me out, but Vail,
Vineyard.
I don't want to steal someone else's, but sort of everywhere you want to be, everywhere I want to be, anyway. We are all talking about contextual, targeted, niche broadcasting. You personify that in terms of the demo that you reach, because your demo is very limited. How's the advertising community responding to that? Because at the end of the day, you don't have 85 million subs like Suzanne does, but yet you have however many millions that are absolutely
right.
spot on for particular brands.
We don't have millions, though.
Millions. Millionaires. Right? Millionaires. This is good.
No, you're right. We're actually really fortunate in that like-minded entertainment, kind of creating a space where you can create meaningful content and wrap a brand around and make the brand feel indigenous to that space gets you kind of way down the road on kind of delivering a marketing message with more impact. We already, we're already there. We already have that space. And we can tell stories around it that people really self-identify by the places they vacation. I go to Aspen, she goes to the Vineyard, so that helps, right? It helps us get down the road. The niche thing can throw an advertiser off. So they all like the idea of acupuncture marketing until it's too painful, until they have to pay for it, basically. So, and it's not totally true. It's it's a bit unfair. It's a bit heavy-handed, but they want the numbers. They're afraid of the trade-off of getting to the niche and getting to the target and paying a little bit more to get to the right target, as opposed to reaching the wide-ranging, GRP kind of buy that they're used to doing.
Well, McKinsey just helped us out, because McKinsey said a couple of months ago that John Wanamaker was really wrong. It's not 50% of your advertising dollars that are wasted. It's only 37.5%. So at least we found, 12.5% somewhere. But that being said, I flip it over to Nick and I say, Nick, you personally represent, one of the great brands that embodies comedy and irreverence and makes me laugh every time I think about it. I don't know talk about a circle jerk. There you go. But, Toga TV is about as irreverent as it can be. How are you finding the ability to communicate with brands at all levels, because you have a demographically targeted, focused group you're reaching?
Yeah, and I knew I was in the right panel when we started talking about circle jerks.
It's too much information.
Yeah. No, but essentially,
we were just saying it generically. We weren't being specific.
We do have a lot of next generation, right, platforms, but what we have going for us are our movies. So the movie kind of keeps it all in perspective, because the movies reach hundreds of millions of people, and that kind of brings it all back to all of our other platforms. And we're not just focusing on broadband TV, or we're just focusing on user-generated, or syndication of content across, a lot of websites to reach that critical mass. We're going across all these platforms at the same time, and that's kind of what we're offering the marketer. We're not saying, we just want you to focus on just this one critical thing. We're gonna kind of come with us and ride some of these waves that we're seeing, that sometimes if we have a wide release, that can bring us back to either a promotion that we're doing on another site, but we're kind of riding those waves. We see a lot of value in video and the video pre-roll, and we do come up against a lot of advertisers that are measuring it differently. They're measuring it on, well, the click-through rate. They want, and so it's really hard to kind of talk to the agencies and get them to kind of, you're always kind of evangelizing what the value is of your video.
Well, but you bring up an interesting point, and I would ask Suzanne to comment on it. Although she's not involved on the ad sales side, we still come up against the question, and Tom, you and I have talked about this before as well, of the metric that needs to be applied to these things, because at the end of the day, we're still dealing with an advertising mentality that wants everything converted to a CPM, even if it's not appropriate. So, what's the valuation? What's the right test? Because we still don't really know what a product living inside the content does in the same fashion that we do, or at least we think we do now with Nielsen being able to tell us. But what metric do you think you need to apply as a network looking at that, Suzanne? Is that a fair question, even though you're not on the ad sales side?
I think it's a fair question. I think that there's many different answers depending on which area of content we're talking about, though. Because when you think about it, there are very consistent metrics now that exist for the traditional linear networks, for the online space in a traditional banner type way. I think any of the other areas where you're getting into pre-roll of video, or you're getting into integration into user-generated, or you're figuring out about podcasting, or embedding advertising into wireless, all those, the metrics are still evolving. Because you can use a traditional metric of, all right, how many people saw it. You can also use any of the measures for engagement, because you're not measuring it by how many people saw it now, you're measuring it by whether or not they gave a damn when they saw it. Some could argue a more compelling metric. That I think when you're looking at it that way, one of the things that we've tried to do to try to help people through that process is to allow them to be on as many platforms at one time with all different creative executions, but with one core property that they're buying into. So if they're buying into E's red carpet coverage and they believe that that works with their brand, so there's not a question as to whether it's appropriate, and then we can figure out a way through developing different content for it to be their integration to occur in different ways, on air, online, on broadband, on wireless, on satellite radio, on podcasting. Then we can, in the form of trying that effort together, monetize really using the places that it's easier to use the metric that exists already. And then come back later and together determine metrics on some of the areas that are not nearly as defined yet, because I think anybody who says they know what metric to use is lying. So it's more compelling to figure it out as we go along, because if you just use a traditional metric on things like podcasting, there's no point in doing it.
Right.
But that could be the most ridiculous statement 5 years from now if it booms and you miss the opportunity.
So let me set up the question for Tom a little, and ask the following. So Tom, conventionally in the sort of background of what Davie Brown did, where its history was, if you will, its heritage, it was product placement, and generally speaking, people didn't pay for that, or if they did, they weren't being represented by the right players at the table. Today, networks more and more have to start to charge, because it's whatever percentage, if you believe any of the statistics, more and more money is going to move into that area where products are going to be. So you have the opposite side of that argument. Two things. So number one is your view of the metric, number one, and number two is how you play in a cross-platform strategy, because I ran into, I think it was Larry Little, who said something about cross-platform creative when we talked in the hall. Did you say that, Larry? I did. You did, good. That was a plug. I was trying to, it was a layup. But the fact is, cross-platform, what does that really mean to you when you're representing Mountain Dew or AT&T, not on the sales side of AT&T, on the buy side?
The answer to the first question, at least in my opinion, is that there is no metric to measure the qualitative side of having a brand inside of an entertainment property. There's just no standard. I don't know if there will be. I know that we've gotten frustrated in dealing with all of the companies that are out there, because they're all missing certain elements. So good chance that we might try to create our own. And if we do, we'll just use it for our clients. And if our clients buy off on it, great. But there's a qualitative or a subjective side of this integration world that is just not being measured, and it's really a seat of the pants decision by a lot of brands whether or not they want to do it, and whether or not they came off looking looking well in whatever property they're in. As far as the cross-platform opportunity that exists with integration, we believe that none of the integration deals that we do should be one-offs. They shouldn't just be on television on a Tuesday night, and if someone missed it, they missed it. It should live in a lot of other places. It should have an online component, and at the end of the day, if you could have a retail promotion or something else tied to it, it becomes a much more integrated program, and you get a heck of a lot more value for the money that you've put into this. The networks are monetizing integration in a way today that they weren't able to do 3 years ago. And so when you think about a 15 or 20-second integration into a television show, it can become pretty expensive when you take not only the incremental media buy, the integration fee, and the time and the effort, which if you don't know, it's the most grueling process you could ever have, trying to get creative and brand to meet inside a show. But when you add all that up, all of a sudden, just for that 15 or 20 seconds or 40 seconds, whatever it may be, if it's true integration and not just product placement, it's just not worth it. It only becomes worth it when it has been extended across many platforms, especially at the area where maybe the rubber meets the road, where you're selling product. And that's just the way that we look at it. It just doesn't make sense to do as a one-off anymore.
I agree with that, and now I turn to Joey as a producer and as a creator of content, and I say, okay, so to be specific to Larry's point, you don't take a print ad and put it on television, and you don't take a television ad and put it on a cell phone. From a content creation standpoint, when you now look at a property or start to ideate, are you thinking, are you thinking in that way? If it's pitched to you, are people pitching you in that way? Or do you have to try and then take something and apply it across and create different forms of that same content?
We're thinking that way. And we've had to migrate our thinking over the last couple of years as the marketplace has changed. I agree with everything you just said, by the way, because I deal with the other side of what Tom has to deal with in terms of integration, and we've actually done some things together in the past.
No, Joey, this is the time you're supposed to say, Tom, you ignorant slut, I don't agree with anything you just said.
Right.
We got to change it up a little bit.
I got you. What he said. Probably the way I can answer that question is to talk to, something that we just had happen was we had a show that was on for 13 seasons called Road Rules, which went away 3 years ago. MTV didn't cancel it, they just stopped picking it up. And you like that? That was their quote to us. But anyway,
we're still dating, we just don't go out.
Exactly. At the time, though, I think our other two MTV shows, Real World and The Challenge, are always really highly rated, and they do very well. And I think the reason they canceled it at the time was it got lower ratings. So John Murray and I always felt that it was a great property, and it had a brand that had lived for a long time, and that it deserved to be resurrected. So we've been talking with them over the last couple of years about how do we do this. So finally we came, this was a while back, probably earlier this year, to this completely integrated way of doing things, which now exists on all of our other shows. And so the way we brought it back was, it was really just a very simple idea. We said, if you really want to watch this show and know what's going on, you have to watch it on TV, you have to do something on the internet, and you have to do something with a cell phone to have the complete experience. So that's how the thinking started. Flash forward to now, all of those somethings have been figured out creatively and operationally, and with the help of MTV, and we figured it out together, and so now the show's going to come back in January. And I think that's a great example of something where for whatever reason, the concept was maybe tired or whatever, lame in some way, or it just wasn't cutting it. So there's elements of it that are the original TV show, but now they're going to live in all these different universes. So again, and it's what you said earlier, Suzanne, about Simple Life is a great example. I think having a brand makes a really big difference. It's something that they can latch onto, and the experience can go across all these platforms. So we're hoping that brand will now live a new life because of that. and also help us and MTV make more money in different ways. So a lot of it is a test of the business model as well.
Absolutely. Eric, let me turn to you and change it up a little and move a little bit away from television for a moment, or from I'll move to movies, to theatrical.
Yeah.
Because that's where you spend most of your time.
A lot of time.
Exactly. The interesting question I have is how brands and movies should be living together, and I think it's an important thing. You know, for years we've seen promotions and Happy Meals, or I guess Happy Meals are out of style now, so we're not allowed to talk. There's no happiness in those meals anymore.
There's talk.
Filled with the spirit.
We're going to make it healthy now because we can't make a deal with McDonald's, is I think what the press release should have said, but it said something different. But seriously, the thing that's always amazed me is how brands, advertising brands, icons, lack respect from the studios.
Well, I also want to.
Is that a fair way to say it?
Before I move on to that, I also want to say something else. We were talking about the kind of advertising and product placement that he was talking about helps when there's a brand that you can attach it to, a Road Rules or something like that. And then the real question becomes, how do you create a brand out of something that isn't that yet? And that, I think, to a certain degree, is one of the problems we're trying to discuss here today. You have all these things that work great, like, I can't tell you how many times we pitch a great idea and the studio goes, well, that'd be great if it was Harry Potter, but this is, you know. And they're right in a lot of cases, because the fan base of Harry Potter or Star Wars or you know, name any film that has a following or a franchise, Lord of the Rings, you know, anything you want. Those fans are avid. They will participate. How do you get somebody to participate in something they don't know what it is? The only example that I can give you of something that's been fairly successful in that I could see over the last few years, although it didn't really translate into ticket sales for some reason, was Snakes on a Plane. People knew what that movie was. They were opting in, participating in everything that was going on with that film up to it opening, with the exception of buying tickets to go see that film. So it was really interesting how they created a brand. We all know what that film is. We all know what it's about. We all know who it stars. We almost feel like we've seen the film already. And maybe the only thing that they did
Seeing
wrong,
the trailer was enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. But you think about it too. That film, if it had just come out without all of that support, we never would have heard about it. Nobody even know what Snakes, is that out yet? Would be most people's question. So they did a really good job of creating a brand of something completely new through a combination of online and fan participation. They would actually create, they're actually, I don't know if you guys know this story, but they solicited message boards for lines that would actually be put in the movie.
Oh, God.
That Samuel L. Jackson actually said, and so fans knew what these lines were, and because they wanted to hear Samuel L. Jackson say this at this time in this film. They didn't know the story yet, so they got people to opt in and participate. They got them to buy in, so they had a sense of ownership over this property in the same way that people do over Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. And I'm a big old Star Wars geek, so I know what a fan thinks like, and I think the only thing they did wrong is maybe they did too much of it. Because people, like I said, already feel like we've seen it. I don't need to now go see it on in the film. It'll be interesting to see what its DVD sales are, though, because I bet everyone will buy it.
You know, the thing is,
Yeah.
and
I know I didn't get to your question.
No, but that's okay. I liked your answer better. It was better than my question.
Okay.
the programming has to be good.
Yeah.
I mean, right, that's what this is how it all started, right? Branding, when we're in programs that people actually wanted to tune into. I think it was Alex Bogusky who recently said, we're starting to expect our advertising to work harder than our programming. At marketing, it doesn't work. You have to have a base. Now, you can create a base. You can create a base and it might be user generated and probably not curated, because then it just gets, you know, watered down to nothing. You can create something, but it has to be great programming. It has to reach out. It has to be meaningful. It has to be impactful, and it has to be something they care about. It has to be great. You know, again, great storytelling.
Well, but I think that's true, and I think Bukowski was right. We are expecting the advertising to work harder than the programming today, as it should, because at this point where people have, and this is a question, so anybody can jump at this, but at this point where the consumer does have the control, and they can opt in more often than not. Well, I mean, I throw this out to anybody. Nick, you know, you grab it, Suzanne, whoever. Don't you have to make it engaging? And forget that that's a buzzword today. whether it's programming or
But it's blurred. I think content's blurred at this point, especially when you're starting to talk about things that are not necessarily going in the traditional linear space. Is that where does programming end and marketing begin? Where does content end and advertising? It's really becoming one thing. And I think in that respect, it all has to be better than maybe it was before. But I agree with what Carla's saying. At some point, okay, everyone's got too many options. They're not going to watch crap.
Yeah, I remember back when, and this is going a long way back, so it may seem like it's irrelevant. My hope is that it is. I remember when Unforgiven came out, and it was, you know, Clint Eastwood's last Western, and there hadn't been a Western around for years. It had been successful, and people were saying the Western is back. Well, it was a good movie. That's why people wanted to see it. No one particularly cared that it was a Western, I don't think, at all, except maybe the fact that Clint Eastwood was in it. And so you saw about 5 Westerns get made by studios and thrown out really quickly, and all of them flopped. And it was just a case, like everybody's saying, make a good movie, and people are going to see it. It's a strange concept, I guess, but and no amount of marketing is going to change that.
The other thing is, it's what we talked about. We were talking about at lunch. It doesn't have to work on every platform. Maybe it doesn't work on every platform. Marketers are now looking for full packages everywhere, and it could be kind of the smallest, kind of campaign they're doing. It needs to be full. It has to be on mobile and on air and in print, and sometimes it doesn't make sense. So now that instead of watering it down, you're forcing it. I mean, it's the same thing, and you're destroying. And Snakes on a Plane might be a good example of we just saw too much of it, and it wasn't that great to start with.
Well, but you always run that risk when the hype.
Yeah.
Well, there may also be a little bit where the audience is so remarkably savvy at this point about marketing tactics that it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that a movie called Snakes on a Plane may not be that good. So at the same time, the marketing interaction that you could have.
That's why we invited you on this panel, Suzanne, because you.
I hope no one in here made that.
But,
call.
But at the same time, I think that the interaction that went along with the marketing support was clearly fun, and people were having a good time doing that, and that achieved their entertainment needs. I agree with you. I think on the home video it may come out. But I mean, it may work for them a lot better. But you can enjoy the marketing and then just bail on the product.
One of the other things I think that happened with Snakes on a Plane too, which was interesting, is a lot of the opinion makers out there, and that's the catchword I hear a lot. We want to get the opinion makers into this, and they're talking essentially about people like Harry Knowles, who runs Ain't It Cool News. We want to get his opt-in on it. Well, Harry Knowles has been very successful doing what he does. He's a very nice guy. I've met him at Comic-Con a couple times because, like I said, I'm a geek as well. And but he just started doing what he wanted to do. He brought his friends in, and he suddenly became an opinion maker. He was all over Snakes on the Plane. He couldn't wait for it to be out, but he does represent a microcosm of the whole community. But the fact that he has a louder voice doesn't necessarily mean that getting him to buy into it means that it's going to translate into ticket sales.
Well, but I go back to the Burger King example, and I've asked the folks at Burger King more than once, did Subservient Chicken actually sell any chicken or Whoppers, or did it just get a lot of press and win awards for Crispin Porter? And I still haven't gotten a fair answer. So,
but you hit it. It's all about press, and the Snakes on a Plane thing was a press-generated frenzy, and I would be willing to bet you that all the people that participated in the user-generated stuff around Snakes on the Plane actually did go see the movie, and that's all there was.
Man.
Those 4 people.
But those 4 people.
Right, but when we talk about movies, though, we're talking about an old, we're back to the old metrics of people going and buying a movie ticket and going to see a movie. And, I think there was an audience. There was an audience there that somebody profited from. Some brand was there when somebody...
or certainly will.
Well, I mean, but from the online stuff, I'm sure there was some pre-rolls, and somebody was getting their message out there. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the direction we're moving in. Is content's going to have to be great, but we all know what's why the broadcast networks are so interested in actual measured people. You can actually measure what people are watching now, and before it was like, we have our Nielsen rating, and it is what it is, and we're all gonna kind of get behind that. But I think that's where it's all headed, and we're all going to have to start thinking about.
Well, but it's interesting you say that, Nick, because I read in the Wall Street Journal today that NBC has chosen not to participate in the Nielsen. The NBC cable networks have decided not to participate in the Nielsen commercial rating project. Mm-hmm. I guess I'll call it a project, but it's beyond a project because don't ask. Don't get, and you may not want to find out. So I think that's an interesting, fact in and of itself, that here's the time when we can get a measurement, but they don't want to opt into it because they don't want to hear what they may hear. So,
well, I think someone else was even saying it earlier. If you can get 1 million people who love Ford trucks to watch the Ford Truck Network, if you were Ford, wouldn't you rather advertise to them than 100 million people on NBC?
well, yes.
May or may not want to buy a Ford.
And the answer is, my friend David Verklin, who runs Aegis Kara, has given this speech before where he said, I represent Polydent and I want to find the 8% of the people in the world who are toothless. Because the other 92% of the world are meaningless to me. So find me the 8% that are toothless and I'm going to spend all the money I've got, because then I won't have that 37.5% waste. So, we haven't gotten there yet. I mean, there are companies out there that are measuring. You've got companies like Rentrak and IAG and people like that that are out there trying to create and trying to create opportunities for a better measurement, so at least the dialogue can be a little more of a level playing field. But people don't seem to want to accept it.
But it is true that I think it goes back to your question earlier about metrics. I think there's a lot of cynicism about a lot of the metrics, and the commercial rating metric is probably the most controversial at the moment, because even Nielsen has had problems saying it works.
Right.
So I think a lot of people are opting out of it for the moment because they're waiting until they believe it's believable in some way, it's credible in some way. And it's not there yet.
Because Nielsen is so credible to start with.
Yes, they're so credible to begin with. Yes, all the metrics are great.
Well,
Somebody told me it worked.
Go ahead, Tom, you were going to say something.
Michael, I was just going to say one thing we haven't talked about that was in the press a couple months ago, over the last, let's call it the last 8 weeks, is Budweiser putting their money where their mouth is and creating Bud TV. And putting a fair amount of money behind that, and if you build it, will they come? I think is the biggest question I have. They are getting content from a number of really reputable producers, so I would assume that they're also going to throw their URL on all their advertising and try and get people there. But that's, to me, the very first and biggest, or let's not say the first, but the absolute biggest test of a brand taking on their own branded content initiative and doing it big.
Well,
see if it works.
The only thing I would beg to differ with you on is historically that's what TV started with. Brands financing the programming 100% until Pat Weaver changed that model in the mid-50s. That I wasn't there, of course. I read about this, but well, I was there for a little of it. Anyway, but the fact is, you're right. In this iteration, it's new and it's out there and it's bold. And we just had the same thing happen with Group M Entertainment. They're now going out and producing content in conjunction with ABC without any advertisers attached, and they're going to go into the production business, and that's changing up the model a bit as well. So. The old expression of, I really don't like to read people's lips, I like to watch their feet and see where they're going. It seems like some people are starting to do what they say as opposed to just talk about it. So from that standpoint, I think it's a good point. What I'd like to do, because I think we're probably in the realm of having a couple minutes here for questions, what I'd like to do is sort of open it up to the audience for questions for any of the panelists. So please.
Just a question on more towards interactive advertising, where you see that going with the CPM model that may or may not be pro. What about the mobile development of interactive advertising through like text messaging? So the ability to put a short code on a billboard, in an ad, on TV, in a radio, and text forward to this short code, and now you're getting actual interactions and measure those interactions.
Well, I think it can be extremely powerful, what you're talking about, if you attach it to something they're going to do on the cell phone anyway. For example, I'll just throw something out there. Say someone wants to buy maybe buy something off their cell phone, ticket, what have you, or something like that. If you then create a situation where you can send something back to them that's selling them something else that may be somewhat related to what they're doing, or maybe not. You've gotten in sort of and perhaps they knew that by using this service. I'm thinking of there used to be like almost a photo. Is it Froder's, the restaurant guide? Say someone's using a restaurant guide on their phone. Boom, they click it. somewhere, someone knows that they're going to a restaurant or looking for restaurants. They send them an advertisement for a restaurant that might be in their area, their geographic area. That can be extremely powerful, I think. You know what they're thinking right now. They're going, oh, I'd kind of like to get something to eat. And here you are giving them an opportunity to do that at half the price or 10% discount, and it's right by your house. And you know what, tonight's taco night, so make it happen. And you can also not only geographically do it, but also do it in the day and the time and all that. So I think that could be very powerful.
Yes.
Hi, Greg Davis. You guys had a lot of conversation.
Can you stand? Sorry.
Can you hear me okay? A lot of conversation about content and things, and we're talking about enhanced ads. It's kind of a big question, but I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on when this gets into a more dynamic scenario. We have hot and swappable ads. Some thoughts on the advantages of sort of how that enhances the experience, and also the negative side and maybe some risks that might present.
So you mean swappable, really targeted?
Yeah. So you know, an ad's been time shifted. You watch it later, and there's something more relevant. That it's a new ad. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
But you're not talking about like the modular, like a visible world that's doing set-top, not set-top yet, but, well, set-top, zip and zone targeting. You're talking about literally time sensitivity changes as opposed to demographic, or both?
Behavioral targeted could be on web 2-foot or on.
Right. So the problem today that I see is what I was saying before. You want niche. You want to reach the 8% of people that don't have teeth. But then there's not this great, pretty marketing package that can be kind of put around that necessarily, because you have to go to all these little niches to find them. So eventually there'll be a pricing mechanism for it, and you still have to create creative for whatever that swappable ad is, and it has to be good enough that somebody wants to click on it, right? So I have kind of a threshold that I have to get over of spending first as an advertiser to get to the 3 people. And 3 people might spend $300 each with me, but I might have to spend $100,000 making it creative. Maybe that's a little.
Well, no, but
that's part of the problem with targeting, which we've all been waiting for 10 years.
Because the modular ads cost money to make, and the creative agencies haven't figured out how to make them work.
Any creative,
right?
Cross, right?
Yeah.
Hi, Kip Gillian at TVA.com. One question I have, this is part of your Great News Star, keep throwing around is everybody's trying to measure the advertising, what's going on with it. What they were looking at is the fact that so many of these platforms that we're advertising on are free. There's no subscription based on MySpace and YouTube and everything else. When I think about people advertising to me, where I buy, it's things that I pay to play for. I go to the gym, I'm taking a trainer, I'll buy more product because I'm obviously more serious about being there. How does that come into y'all's equation? We're looking at a cycle. We're going to spend X amount of dollars advertising on here, but nobody actually pays to be here. Do y'all?
Well, but let me just jump at that. I mean, television and radio broadcast, that's the model. It's always been free. We thought. It was never free. The quid pro quo was, I will give you content to watch and or listen to if you are at least available to watch and or listen to the commercial messages I send you. Different than Time Magazine, where you are buying it, but television was that way until we got to. Well, but again, but we can't confuse where we started to where we are today. But
And I only wanted to add that a great many of the, like I said, I've been doing this 8 years, and that is almost an eternity in the internet. And most of our sites, when we began, had that business model where people paid for to access content. ESPN's probably one of the few successful ones that I can note to get, and they do it in a really interesting way. They give you enough content that you'll visit the site, and then the stuff you really want to read about, like some guy's draft prognosis or something like that. They'll give you just a little bit of it. They'll give you that Reggie Bush will be the first pick, and then if you want to know what the other 31 picks are going to be, you got to become an insider, which is great because I can't tell you how many times I've been like, I do want to read the rest of that story, and it's only so much. So yeah, and I'm really into sports. So I do think that model can work. But what we did find was it didn't work for things, again, unless someone was an avid fan, or it was necessary for their company, like a Business Week or a New York Times, or that's not the one, that Wall Street Journal, something like that, where they could probably get somebody to write it off. And what happens is you do have people who are more serious. I think you're absolutely right, because they paid, they're more avid, they're more apt to need the things that you are selling because they paid and opted in to get this. Roto-World is another example. A lot of your fantasy football sites that give information as well. They've opted in, they're definitely fans. But what you find is that unless it's a franchise or something like that, like a sports or something, the people who will visit that site are much less. So you are reaching like a more serious buyer, but you're reaching far less of them.
You know, but I'd rather be okay if and I don't buy advertising. I sell it, so this is it's right the inherent problem. So the way I would buy it if I bought it, I'd buy a lot on Plum to start with, and then I would buy where people are vested in being there, free or not free, and that means you know, a travel site. I'm doing travel research because I'm looking to go somewhere, so you can help me there. It's meaningful to me. I think it's less meaningful. I always thought, and this shows you how brilliant I am, I always thought Yahoo was less meaningful, frankly, just kind of going on the front page of Yahoo. I don't want to see anything. There's nothing I want on the front page of Yahoo. I want to go to where I want to go, and maybe it's the finance section. YouTube, that front page is not so meaningful to me either, because I'm not even looking at what's, I'm just going to the video I want to go see. As long as there's a vested interest in the user, I don't care that it's free. It's right, it's NBC 50 years ago.
And then there are sites like GameTap, where it's like, you know, the TV's free, but you're kind of paying for a bundled service within that when you're getting video games. So there's so many different.
Yeah, hi. My name is Frank. I'm with Verizon. I'm a consultant and an analyst. And I have a question regarding the most relevant today, the video on demand and the video world. The on demand and the VOD. And at AdTech in New York, 2 weeks, a lot of the issues are going to be based around video, ad insertion, placement, interactively placing ads, and having it just sitting there for whatever, and maybe be there for a lifetime of a video. I'd like the panels take everybody's opinion on, you know, where they think that this is going to take place. Because the buying and selling process, it ain't going to go what? Sits on the VOD or on demand, it's going to sit there maybe for 2 years in reference to a brand or a product or an advertisement. I'd like to take everybody's opinion on that, what they think about it, because they're pushing that in New York. So.
Well, I'll answer first. I think it's more vital if the ad can be swapped out, because it reminds me of when you rent a video. You used to rent videos for, say, a film you'd seen 10 years ago because it was one of your favorite films, and it still got the trailer for some film that was coming out that year. It sort of loses its relevance. But if you have a business model where you have a show that you know someone's going to return to, I think it actually has a great deal of value if that ad can be a hotspot and generate continuous revenue over and over for that company that's providing the video on demand.
There are plenty of services. There's Black Hour. I mean, there's plenty of guys who are now starting to do it. That it's going to happen. It has to happen, because I know our sponsors don't want stuff sitting up there for 6 months. They definitely don't want it living past the shelf life of whatever the creative campaign was.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. What she said.
Yes.
Jay Christian from KPMG. We're talking about Bud TV and trying to make an example of that is. Can you comment, somebody up on the panel or multiple people, on the fate of mobile ESPN, which is like a very popular brand, but being shut down now?
Well, I think they just made a stupid move, and they made it applicable only to those handsets, right?
Yeah. Right.
I don't know who pulled the trigger on that one.
Content, ESPN content is available across a bunch of platforms.
Yeah.
Well, but
ESPN was supposed to be optimized.
But the idea is you have such an entrenched consumer today. Are they going to change up their service for that now? And I think they were just too late to the game. I mean, you know, if that had been 5 years ago, they might have had a different fate. I think with entrenched users, you're not changing your system. You're not going, the churn is not as great as it was in the mobile space 5 years ago. So that would be my answer.
I don't think it says anything about the content or the idea behind it. It has everything to do with the
time to market.
The time to market, and the fact that they were asking people to make a change that cost a lot of money. Yeah.
I'd agree with that.
Just a dumb business move.
Yes.
I'm Jason. I'm really asking the question around music licensing and what is driving you to license music and what's the rationale behind why you license music to shows.
For us?
Apply that to the brand Crossbridge.
For us?
Yes.
We don't really. There's no science to that. It's really a feel. I mean, we are kind of known for the music in our shows, and we have some really great people that at the company. We have this whole department that, you know, spends a lot of time sifting through all kinds of different sources, finding music. But it's really based on the content of the shows and what we feel is right in terms of the scene. You know, it depends on what's happening. It's all scene work. If somebody's crying, there's going to be, obviously, we're not going to have a bunch of Metallica going on, you know, during that. So it's really based on that. We don't really even think about anything in context of, you know, what's going on outside of the show, or even in the brand of the show. You know, the Real World's got, you know, there might be, I don't know, in one half-hour episode, you know, 50, 60 different music cues. So it's really creatively based, and it's all kind of gut instinct.
Is there a desire to put new bands on the show, though, rather than?
We do that all the time.
Yeah.
Our guys are really good at doing that and finding new bands, and actually so good, in fact, that we actually created a whole separate kind of like mini label / music management company inside the company, because we were always finding these guys, and then they would blow up, and then we kind of watch that happen.
I think we've probably got time for one or two more questions. So, yes, Marcy.
I want to address the issue of transparency a little bit, especially when we're talking about some of the blending of content and marketing. And do you see A, consumer backlash against some of that, and B, a regulatory type of intervention coming up the way that Europe is more regulated in terms of being a little more transparent or accountable in terms of who's paying for what?
No and no. I'm sorry to be flippant about it. I haven't seen any consumer backlash. I don't know if Joey hears about it when somebody from the network calls and said, we're getting a tremendous amount of calls about your show and including this brand. I think a lot of people have talked about it. A lot of people have said, hey, listen, we're exposed to X millions of messages per day. You know, here's another one. I think people are pretty savvy about it. You know, the FCC, as long as it, you know, is a little bit more Republican, it'll probably let the market decide and just say, hey, people aren't going to watch the show if they feel offended by this gratuitous thing inside of a show. And I think people like Joey and at the network level will self-police and not allow inorganic or things that are not authentic to occur inside of programming. We're still at the infancy of integrating brands inside in a meaningful way, or in a way that goes beyond product placement. So I think we're all figuring out how to do it better every day. I was just on a set on Friday of a pretty big show where, you know, it was grueling, it was tough. But I think we arrived at a couple of places where it seems to make sense. So, you know, a lot was made of that a couple of years ago. I just haven't seen it materialize.
Yeah, I agree.
I would agree with that too.
We try to just make sure that it's done tastefully, and almost our criteria is if you can't tell that it's there, then we succeeded.
I think most of the networks have also
so to speak
conservative. I think was such a concern about there being backlash that I think there's more of a conservative nature in terms of how some of the things are done from the very beginning, figuring. And I think it goes back to what Carla said before, that if the content's good, there's not going to be a backlash. And if the content's bad, then there will be.
Plus, it's not veiled. We're not trying to fool anyone anymore. You'd have to be living in a cave for the past 3 years to not know that.
To know that there's a reason.
Likely there for a reason.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think the audience is used to it now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think the advertisers have to be careful, though, not to, like, I'm thinking of a CSI episode I saw where this guy's cell phone rang, and it was a Coldplay song, and it was obviously there to advertise the fact that you could buy this Coldplay song, which they then, advertised at the end of the show.
So it worked?
No, well, it stuck out completely, and what it made you do is not want to download that particular song. I mean, it stuck out like a sore thumb. So if there's going to be any backlash, I don't think it'll ever be to the show itself. It'll be to the advertiser who has destroyed the reality or the supposed reality of the show. That's why it has to be very, very subtle.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Wait, hang on though, because we did something a few years ago at NBC, which they were telling me I was going to get sent to jail for. I got saved because it was a charitable thing that was attached to it. Grace wore on Will and Grace the pink pony sweaters. White sweater was the first kind of one of the bigger pink ponies. And there was just a little bumper at the end that we put on the show that kind of did if you want to buy, and there was a donation, obviously, for Breast Cancer Foundation. We did it outrageously well, and there wasn't, because of the charitable thing, there was no FCC issue. I mean, the fact is she was wearing the shirt already. I remember we didn't place it. She was going to wear the shirt already. We found out about it, and then decided to put this on, but it was pretty blatant.
But someone wearing a
up.
shirt, the only thing I would say is someone wearing a shirt, they have to wear a shirt. I mean, she can't be on the show without a shirt, so she might as well be wearing.
Well, she could, but that would be simple, I think.
That's true.
And,
Talk about good content.
yeah, exactly. So, I think in that way it's genuine and authentic and doesn't, but this was, they were walking
Yeah, but
outside and boom,
Guys,
30-second firefight.
same show, Will and Grace. As somebody that Tom knows represents, one of the other guys in the business represents Microsoft. And day and date with the release of the first Xbox, day and date, there was a Will and Grace episode where Megan Mullally walked into the neighbor's place and said, "Oh, you got your Xbox." I mean, that was pretty blatant.
Yeah, that would be.
Okay, that was not, she wasn't wearing a shirt. Whether she was or not, it didn't matter. But so, you know, there is that, somebody owed somebody a favor on that one, but that's a whole other story. I thank you, and I thank our panelists.